welcome to another exciting Vobes. No, it's not a Vobes show. It's the Bold Explorer Live. Sorry, I confused myself for a minute. It can happen. I'm Richard Vobes, and I am reading Narrowboat by LTC Rolt. We are on Chapter 9 at the moment, halfway through Chapter 9, which is Part 2 of his book. It comes in, I don't know how many parts it is, actually. It's worth having a quick look. Certainly comes in three parts. So we're in part 2. Keith, good morning to Keith Taylor. He says, I am getting the chat, but not you, Richard. Yeah, sometimes it is a moment or two before I put the chat up before the stream goes out. Audrey says, good morning. Linda Kane, hello. Thought I was going to be talking to myself. Where is everybody? We're all a bit late. Excuse me. Morning, Richard, says Philip. I got it now. Marvellous. Well done, Keith. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're all well. A bit cooler here in the UK today. Made myself a cup of tea, keep myself warm. Had a successful time yesterday making and baking bread. I'm going to make a video today for tomorrow about bread making. And then the plan is to deliver it to the lovely Julia. Either toss it over a hedge or try and push it through the post box, the letter box. You should slice by slice. I could do that. The very lovely Candice, good morning to you. Ed Loud, good morning. Simon Hodgkins, hi Richard, from sunny Dublin in Ireland. Nice to see you, Simon. And Andy Stacey, good morning to you. Rami Boo, lots of people all coming along. Good morning to Lisa, good morning to Fiona. Hello to Anne, welcome along, nice to see you. We're going to be reading, as I say, the continuing saga. And this is really interesting. I pre-read most of what I'm going to read today. It may not be all of what I read today, so I may have to do some of it blind. I do that when I want to do it blind. Just cover the good eye, and then I can do it blind. And it's interesting because the chapter is called Banbury to Braunston. And Julia and I have booked a canal boat trip on the Oxford Canal. Actually, not thinking about this, I think it's Braunston that at the boatyard there, that we get our boat. And the plan was to go south down the Oxford Canal, which will actually take us through the route that we are reading about at this moment. We'll be doing it in reverse, which is a shame. But of course, we will be doing it back. Depending on how far we get, we will be doing it back up again. And it would be lovely to see the places mentioned in this book, because he mentions certain things, as you'll see, landmarks, and it will be interesting to know whether they are still there. My glasses have a habit at the moment of being crooked. Don Collins, hello to you from New Zealand. Lovely to see you. My mum's awake too. She would like to say hi to Janet. She'd like you. Hello, Janet. Hello, Janet and Lisa. Nice of you to drop in the middle of the night in Oregon. Jim Hook, good morning from Australia. We have an internet. It's very odd, I have to say. I know I'm so used to doing these lives. I'm in my room in Worthing in West Sussex at the foot of the South Downs at the edge of the English Channel in England, and people are watching from different parts of the globe. It is even now it does seem like pioneering work, but there you go. You'll have to go backwards, says Linda Kane. Yes, well, we'll get down there and then we've got to return the boat, haven't we? So yeah, we can have done the recce and reread the chapters, I suppose, and then on the way back point them out. I don't know how. I think I'm pretty certain that's it. I wanted to actually look at the map beforehand to see, because he talks about it being incredibly windy, as you'll hear in a minute. And so I thought, I'd like to have seen a map and some of the landmarks, because I've driven up the M40 enough times, passing over the canal at different points, but it's different. Anyway, The last time we left, they'd gone to the Red Lion, I think. And they had that strange cryptic message on the wall that people were there to decipher. And then there was a message saying, "No teaching one another to read the above under forfeit of a quart of the landlord's best ale." And that's where I struggled yesterday. Lisa says that Janet doesn't understand how this works. She's waving and yelling from across the room. Hello, Janet. Stop yelling. It's all right. I can't hear you. It's deafening in my left ear. That's actually my right ear. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Good stuff. All right. So let's have a slurp of tea, and we'll carry on. We returned to a hot dinner on board, which would have been an excellent meal in any place, but was a veritable banquet in such circumstances and surroundings. Banbury and the familiar boatyard seemed already far away, although we had journeyed only 5.5 miles. Yet herein lies the value of canal travel, and the deep core of truth in old Jack Harwood's reply to the cocksure policeman. For if man had never discovered the mechanical arts by which he annihilates space and time, he might never have acquired that tragic contempt for local environment, custom, and tradition which has led him to break faith with the land. Man has built himself wings before he can fully learn how to walk. And I think that's actually a very true little statement, that we all now rush around, and this COVID outbreak has forced us, people like me, certainly, who makes videos, to explore the local area a lot more than one would do. And I guess his point there is that by travelling slowly, you're taking in things at a much slower pace. And you're seeing your environment rather than just trying to get somewhere else and just see that place. The canal veers away from the river beyond Cropperdy, climbing out of the valley in leisurely fashion through Broadmoor, Varney's and Elkington's locks, then more steeply through a flight of 5 near the village of Claydon. When we left Claydon Top Lock the next morning, we entered the highest section of the Oxford Canal, or the summit level as it's called, which cuts across the limestone ridge at its lowest and narrowest point between Mill Hill and Shern Hill, near the villages of Fenny Compton and Wormleighton. The deep cutting through this high ground was originally a tunnel, although it was opened out many years ago, and it's still called that by the boatmen who have long memories. When we emerged from the tunnel and swung right-handed to follow the slope of the edge, the view opened out with Burton Dasset post mill on its bare hill standing sentinel above the broad upper valley of the Itchen. Now, when I read this earlier, I wondered if that post mill is still there, Burton Dasset post mill, because when you travel up the M40, there is a post mill on the landscape standing sentinel, and it must be in that same area, and I wonder if it's there, the Burton Dasset post mill. Maybe somebody could just look that up. This is what I love about this little bit of interaction, and see if it's still there and whether that's the same one I'm thinking of. The canal leaves the village of Fenny Compton a mile to westward, and the boatman's Fenny consists solely of a disused wharf and the George and Dragon Inn, a large whitewash building which, though it stands on the very edge of the canal, has no water supply, drinking water being supplied in jars by the brewers. How extraordinary. Here we stopped for tea, as by this time it was late afternoon, and we finally moored for the night by Griffin's Bridge under the arc of Wormleighton Hill. Through a screen of trees on the hilltop we could just discern the roofs of the village, and resolved to walk up to it the following morning. Lost in woodland away from the main roads, the centuries have passed lightly over Worm Leighton, with no more stir than a flight of birds. Villages such as this, a cluster of cottages of brick, stone and thatch, a manor house and a farm or two, are the simple roots of England. The manor, which is now a farm, sleeps under tall elms, dreaming of more spacious days. Like some last courtier at a gypsy camping place, babbling of fallen majesty, records what's gone. That's a quote from somewhere, presumably a bit of Shakespeare, I imagine. Its magnificent detached gatehouse of stone bears proudly the arms of England and the escutcheon of the Spencers, but the grass grows long about it. In the old church, not far distant, is a tablet to the memory of the son of Earl of Spencer, who died at Blois, or Blois, I'm not sure, it's a French place, in 1619. The words look so newly graven, and so ageless is the spirit of the place, that 300 years seems but a little span. On the crest of the long, narrow promontory, which Worm Leighton Hill thrusts out into the valley of Itchen, there stands a solitary farmhouse, which must be a very familiar landmark to the Oxford Canal boatman. As we left Griffin's Bridge, it lay dead ahead of us, but we presently turned westward and passed it on the right side. When we reached the point of the headland, the canal made another turn so sharply that Cressy swung round in her own length, and we passed the farm once more, this time on the other side of the hill. As the now familiar buildings fell astern, we thought we had surely seen the last of them, but no, they presently reappeared for the third time, now once more ahead of us. We had completed a full circle of nearly 3 miles and had come within a half-mile of our starting point. For mile after mile we wound round in this fashion, following the irregular contour of the land, the way so tortuous that we lost all sense of direction. A canal bridge would appear surprisingly in the most improbable position, only 1 field away, and half an hour later we would pass under it, or discover that we had done so some time before. Figures prove that this is no exaggeration, for the summit level from Claydon to Marston Doles is 11 miles long, and yet it is only 4.5 miles as the crow flies, or 6 by road. It's been said that the rolling English drunkard made the rolling English road, but there is not a wandering lane that can vie with the canals in this respect, and this meandering is the great part of their charm. Like the old roads, they were built before the age of hurry, and the way in which they follow the lie of the land is particularly characteristic of the earlier waterways built or surveyed by James Brindley, the father of the English canals. Samuel Smiles, in his biography of this pioneer, said he would rather go round an obstacle in the shape of an elevated range of country than go through it. Although the length of the canal would be worked was longer, yet the cost of tunnelling and lockage was avoided. Perhaps the population of the district was fully accommodated. No road could be so solitary as this canal, for in the whole day's journey we met only one fellow traveller, Alfred Horn, on his weekly journey to Banbury with coal. We exchanged greetings and news as we came abreast, continuing in raising voices as our boats slowly drew apart. Doubtless he would pass on the information to other boatmen that he had met Cressy up 11 Mile Pound. In this way, news travels with surprising swiftness over hundreds of miles of canal. Burton Desset Windmill and Beacon blew down. In 1946. The beacon is used in the Civil War as a lookout tower. Ah, right. Thank you, Linda. How smash it? So that's not the one I can see then. That's a different windmill that I see. Isn't that interesting? No, oh yeah, no other soul did we see until the carroty-haired boy came out of the cottage by the waterside of Marston Dolls to set the lock for us. This was Napton Top, the first of a flight of 9, their gates so decrepit and weather-worn that it seemed a push would send them toppling into the water. The process now was reversed, Cressy coming into a full lock and slowly sinking downwards as the water rushed into the pound below. 9 locks take some time to negotiate, so that it was evening by the time we reached the bottom to moor by the village of Napton on the hill. This must be the strangest village in all Warwickshire, a translation in brick of the stone villages of the South Cotswold valleys. The church stands on the top of the hill, and the cottages, connected by breakneck lanes and cobbled paths, look as though they were struggling to climb the steep slope towards it, seeking salvation. A derelict tower mill also crowns the hill, looking across to its fellow at Burton Dasset, and the canal curved so closely beneath the slope that our moorings were almost in the shallow of the gaunt sails. It was here that we found our first Canal inn. Approached by a rough track, it stood in the fields on the side of the canal away from the village, and with outbuildings grouped around the house, it looked like a small farm, except for the faded sign of the Bull and Butcher over the door. Inns such as this fulfil the same purpose as the great posting houses of coaching days, for they are recognised stages on the water roads where many generations of boatmen have been accustomed to tie up and stable their horses for the night. Today they are fast going the way of their great predecessors, for the motorboat is emptying their stables and bar parlours. Though the motor travels a little faster than the horse, it doesn't tire, so that once familiar moorings becomes filled up with mud, the rings rusty, long from disuse, while far into the night the boats pass by. Thanks to the survival of horse-drawn traffic on the Oxford Canal, the Bull and Butcher has been more fortunate than many inns that we encountered subsequently, and we had not been long at our moorings before the first wayfarer arrived and led his horse over the bridge to the stable. By the time dusk fell, there were 6 boats moored beside us, the womenfolk standing at their cabin doors exchanging gossip while they polished brasses, mopped paintwork, or peeled potatoes. Children called shrilly to each other, and dogs padded eagerly to and fro along the gangplanks, whinnying to get to shore. There was a pervasive odour from some simmering stewpot, and the smoke from the brass-bound stove chimneys rose straight into the windless evening air. It was dark, and there was a thin cry of bats when we walked down to the Bull and Butcher after dinner. By the light of a paraffin lamp, the landlord was pouring beer out of a tall, enamelled jug. He was more of a farmer than a publican, big-boned and swarthy, his shirt sleeves leaving his bronzed forearms bare to the elbow. 2 boat captains in dark corduroys were playing a game of 501 on the dartboard. Each wore a gold ring in one ear, which gleamed in the lamplight, and lent them an appearance that was strangely foreign. They were joined presently by their wives, who sat on a bench apart, drinking stout and conversing in subdued undertones. There was no interchange of conversation between the 2 groups, for mixed drinking is not a principle of the canal folk. Here it was permitted on sufferance, because there was only one licensed room. Beside the fireplace there stood a skittle table, which appeared to have been ousted from popular favour by the dartboard. This game is played in the same manner as the better-known alley game, its advantage being that it requires little space. The 9 pins are set up upon a table, which is protected by a padded back and a suspended net. The oval wooden cheese, measuring approximately 4 inches in diameter by 2 inches thick, is then thrown at them from a distance of about 8 feet. There is considerable skill and sleight of wrist in the way a good local exponent flings the curiously shaped missile, and often scores a florer by striking the leading pin at precisely the right angle and strength. The game has a definite regional character, for I doubt whether it will be found outside a radius of 20 miles of Northampton. The subject of these old country games is of great interest, and one about very little has been written. Soon many of them will be forgotten, for the dartboard is rapidly becoming ubiquitous, aided and abetted by elaborate electrical pin tables. Some districts still staunchly support their local skittle alleys, while in others the old games of quoits and shove halfpenny is still popular. I know of one village in Cheshire where they favour the original bagatelle board, while in certain parts of Shropshire they play dominoes with a double set of chips ranging up to double 12. In the low-ceilinged bar of an inn at Burbage, a Wiltshire village at Savernake Forest, they still play ringing the bull. A copper bull ring hangs suspended by a cord from a hook in the rafters and has to be swung over a peg on the wall. This simple game is said to be the oldest survivor of all, a contemporary perhaps of 9 men's Morris. The decline of these games is contemporaneous with that of all the rural arts, a decline that had begun even in Shakespeare's day. The 9 men's Morris is filled up with mud, and the quaint mazes of Wanton Green, for lack of tread, are indistinguishable. I'm not very good at reading Shakespeare. I don't even try. Just before we left the Bull and Butcher, a newcomer entered the bar bearing the largest mushroom we'd ever seen. There was great controversy as to its size, which was eventually settled with a ruler when a ruler was produced, and it was found to measure just over a foot in diameter. Such giants are not uncommon, we are told, in the meadows below Knapton Hill, and as we rose to go, we were presented with 2, which were only slightly smaller. Next day, Angela stewed them, as we had been directed, not without misgivings, it must be admitted, although we found them excellent eating. We heard the patter of rain on our cabin roof that night, but when we climbed up Knapton Hill in the morning, We heard the patter of rain on our cabin roof that night, but when we climbed up Knapton Hill in the morning, the sun was shining brightly and a fresh breeze was blowing a white fleece of clouds overhead, which patterned the green slopes with their swiftly chasing shadows. The climb was well repaid. Immediately below us, the canal swept round the base of the hill in a horseshoe curve, like a moat about a castle, and beyond lay the Warwickshire Plain, a grand expanse of rolling country, so thick set with great trees that from its vantage it was easy to believe that there was still a forest of Arden. The wind drummed in our ears as only a wind can, that blows unchecked over leagues of open country. It hissed through the bending summer grasses and set the bare sails of the mill creaking and straining impotently. Inside the tower of the mill was a sorry sight. The staunch wooden gearing and drive shafts, thick as a stout tree, were still in place, but the stones were gone, and the floor had become no more than a rubbish dump and a roost for chickens. Pigeons had made their cote in the cupula, and their murmuring mingled with the whistle of the wind to make a plaintive duet most fitting for this airy ruin. There is no more eerie or more desolate place than a disused wind or watermill, especially when the old machinery remains to speak of past activity. Seeing them, so simple in construction and operation, and yet so lastly wrought, one marvels that man has seen fit to abandon their tireless elemental powers in favour of the intricate, short-lived internal combustion engine, which is dependent on a fuel destined one day to become exhausted. Knapton Mill is at once a symbol and an epitaph, a symbol of broken faith with the soil, an epitaph to the golden corn which once waved in the neglected pastures below. Journeying on that afternoon, we passed the brick field, which is eating its way into the western slope of the hill, and presently came to the junction of the Warwick and Knapton Canal. This waterway, and the 5 miles of the Oxford Canal to Braunston, have become part of the Grand Union Company's through route between London and Birmingham. It was obvious that we had emerged from a byway onto a main road, for the channel was wider and deeper, while instead of the reedy margins, the banks were set with concrete piling to resist the wash of many motorboats. Although something of the charm of the less frequented canal was lacking, we found moorings that could not have been bettered in a belt of tall elm trees by the village of Lower Shruckborough, possibly. The village itself was an undistinguished row of brick cottages strung along a main road, but of this we were out of sight and sound, separated by the trees and the breadth of a paddock. Having swept the sky clear of clouds, the wind had dropped, as it so often does at the going down of the sun, and it was a perfect summer's evening. We dined on the foredeck, watched with mild, wide-eyed curiosity by the 2 young bullocks who thrust their wet muzzles through the fence, almost touching Cressy's bow, while overhead a thrush made music for us, pouring out a tireless cascade of song. We have often listened to the nightingales in Hampshire coverts, yet I still consider the thrush and the blackbird better songsters. Besides theirs, the nightingale song lacks depth and feeling, so I doubt if it would have won such renown did it not sing when other birds are silent. Till now, I have found it difficult to fully realise that the years of waiting and planning had at last come to an end, and that we were actually established in a floating home with hundreds of miles of water before us with which to roam at will. I began to appreciate this fact that night as I lay in the mellowing influence of a hot bath. The fresh smell of dew-laden grass drifted in through an open window at my side, and a low, large moon silvered the water. The night was so still that every leaf of the dark trees hung in motionless silhouette, like stage scenery against an immense starry horizon. How else, I reflected, could we have approached so near the heart of the country? And at times like this, the discomforts of camping are bathos. The motor car, a most monstrous anachronism, and the hotel bedroom, a stuffy prison. Cressy, on the other hand, seemed to become so at one with her peaceful surroundings that even in the dark of our sleeping cabin, the summer night was close about us. The end of the day brought no anticlimax, no closing of doors. And that ends chapter 9 of our book. Let's catch up with some of the comments. Let me just get my eyes to refocus over here by moving the comments over here. Somebody's talking about, finally, I have Audi's early doors and no queues, says Turbo Stream. Good day from Brisbane. The owl is about 35 to 40 years old. Now, you're talking about an owl. I don't know where that came in. And in all captivity, so he probably won't survive. Hopefully he'll come back in his own. Diane Patterson, have you considered Super Chat? It would be useful yesterday when we were trying to tell you how to pronounce... recusant. Recusant. Thank you. Yes, I guess Super Chat would have been good. I think you have to have over 1,000 people. Oh well, I've got that on the Board Explorer, haven't I? I keep thinking this is the other one. Yes, I'll have to look at getting that organised. Sean Lynch, good day, Richard and fellow listeners. Linda Kane, the Bull and Butcher closed in 1940s and 1992. Oh, closed between, I beg your pardon. Now reopened with good food, apparently busy in the summer, quiet in the winter. So you can visit. We will have to visit. That would be amazing. Now known as the Folly Pie Pub. Keith Taylor. Is it really? Now known as the Folly Pie Pub. What a dreadful name. Sorry for the late reply. I have my fingers crossed for you and the owl. Good morning from Madrid. Good morning, Morton Lewis from Madrid. Have another slurp of tea. That's It is a. I was wondering, reading this. This is 1944. He's doing this. Presumably the war is still going on, and they're just check this out. When this was published in 1944, and then presumably he did, first published 1944. So the war must have been coming, but I guess, apart from the odd doodle bug, there was nothing. Nothing to worry about. So I just suddenly read this bit about the dust cover. The dust cover is from a specimen of the traditional boat painter's art by Mr. Herbert Tooley, and Herbert Tooley is the guy who painted the Cressy. So that is an actual piece of his work, which is lovely to see, actually. Yeah. So I wonder. He was. I can't remember. He was in his 30s or something when he did this. Was he? Somebody said to me that, maybe I've got that wrong. He must have been retired. I can't remember. One would have to work it out. When was he born, Mr. Rolt? Can somebody work that out? When was LTC Rolt in 1944? How old was he when he did that? Because he's living on a boat to live. Presumably, he writes. That's what he does for a living. So he can sit there and write, I guess. I was just trying to work out how one earns a living, you see, and why he's not doing anything for the war effort. He's writing about a trip they started in the summer of 1939, says Keith Taylor. Oh, is it? Oh, right, in 1939, just before the war. Oh, right, born in 1910. Oh, okay. So he was 29. Blimey. That was quite young then. Died in 74. Yeah, and weirdly, about 1974, I went on my first canal trip as a young, with my family, with Ho Seasons. I remember doing it, not having read the book. They might have been U-boats on the canal. What? Gas Street Basin was notorious for torpedo attacks. I can't imagine there would have been on the Oxford Canal a U-boat going along, because it was, well, most canals are about 4 foot deep. WhatsApp is free to talk on, even with video calls are free. Let's try and read a little bit more. This is another... Oh, it's not too long, this chapter. We might get through this. This is chapter 10, the Grand Union Canal. Braunston with its single sheet... Braunston, with its single sheet of great length, strung along the crest of a low hill ridge above the canal, is typical of the large villages in this part of the world. At the end of the ridge stands the church, whose tall spire is a landmark for many miles westward. Beside it, an old water tower mill bereft of sails. But it was at the opposite end of the village that we found what struck me as the most curious feature of the place. Here, the even rank of houses, some of brick and others of Northamptonshire stone, was broken in a most surprising and irrelevant manner by a single diminutive cottage perched upon a strip of green sward flanking the road. A small patch of the common had been enclosed around it, and it had been planted so impudently before its neighbours' doors that only the narrowest of cobbled alleyways separated them. Surely this upstart must be a product of that ancient custom rooted in granting of land to bowmen in recognition of their war services, by which a man might claim a holding on common land provided he had one chimney smoking between sunset and sunrise. Whether true or not, it was easy here to visualize dark figures feverishly and furtively at work upon the green at the dead of night, and to picture the chagrin of the villagers on looking out the next morning to see a crazy shack sprung up before their doors, its rickety chimney smoking derisively. We left the Oxford Canal for the Grand Union at Braunston Junction, passed by Nurse's Boatyard, where a new wooden boat lay partially completed on the stocks, and so came to the first of 6 locks by which the canal ascends to Braunston Tunnel. These were heavier and more complicated to work than those on the Oxford Canal, being wide locks capable of passing 2 boats at a time. The gates are therefore more massive, and, in addition, some are equipped with what are called side ponds to economise water. One of these ponds is constructed beside the lock at a level midway between the upper and lower pounds of the canal, and by means of the side pond paddle, half the contents of a full lock can be discharged into it. The paddle is then dropped so that this water is stored in the pond and can subsequently be used again to half fill the empty lock. In this way, half a lock of water is saved, an economy which is worth the additional outlay involved, for each lock holds no less than 56,000 gallons, all of which would otherwise have to be supplied by the summit level of the canal each time a boat passed through. When we reached the top lock, we could see the black mouth of the tunnel ahead of us. It's over a mile in length, and like the majority of canal tunnels, has no towing path. To relieve horseboat captains of the tedious and heavy task of legging their way through it, the company used to run a service of steam tugs, which plied to a regular timetable, but these were withdrawn from service 4 years ago, owing to the decline of horse-drawn traffic, the little that remains having to rely on obtaining a tow from a friendly motorboat. The tunnel is straight, and occasionally in clear weather it is just possible to discern in the dark depths the pinpoint of light, which is the opposite mouth. More often, however, it is obscured by the hazy atmosphere of the smoke of cabin fires. Navigating a canal tunnel, is an odd experience, the first difficulty being to keep a straight course. Anyone who's experienced the temporary blindness on entering a dark cinema from broad daylight will be able to appreciate this. The stern of the boat is lit by the light streaming in through the mouth of the tunnel, but the bow, 70 feet ahead, is swallowed up by an impenetrable darkness which the eye strains in vain to pierce. Sense of direction is temporarily lost, and by a curious illusion the boat appears to be swinging rapidly in a circle. The secret is to hold a straight course until the eye becomes accustomed to the dark, for if one obeys the instinctive urge to correct these imaginary gyrations, the boat starts to weave, the bow cannoning from one wall to the other with a series of frightening, echoing thuds. This unpleasant proceeding becomes positively dangerous if another boat happens to be approaching, for there is only just enough passing room. In order to overcome this difficulty as far as possible, I had equipped Cressy with a wide-beam electric headlamp, which would be quickly mounted on a suitable bracket on the fore end of the cabin top, and plugged into a convenient socket. Even so, the first few 100 yards were difficult going, until I managed to pick out the arch of the roof illuminated by the lamp. Meanwhile, the sound of our engine and churning screw, normally almost unnoticeable, was prodigiously magnified by the hollow reverberations from the walls and the ice-cold showers of water. From the walls, and the ice-cold showers of water at intervals from the mouldering bricks overhead, which were festooned with stalactites. Most of these miniature waterfalls seemed to find their way with unerring accuracy down the back of my neck, so on entering subsequent tunnels I always took care to put on a mackintosh. At intervals there were ventilation shafts, the wan beams of light which rayed downwards from them through the murky atmosphere, making lonely luminous pools in the darkness. By imperceptible degrees the tiny speck of light ahead became a vivid miniature of green banks and sunlit water, until we finally emerged from the southern portal by Welton Wharf after 20 minutes underground. A further half-hour brought us within sight of Norton Junction, near Long Buckby, where our short journey over England's busiest inland waterway came to an end. Here we moored Cressy by the toll office at the junction, walked down to the towpath of the main canal to Buckby Wharf, where I knew that we should find a canal shop with painted water cans for sale. This insignificant little shop standing beside Buckby Top Lock has customers all over England. There is scarcely a boat trading down to Brentford or Paddington Basin that does not carry a Buckby can, and I have recognised their distinct style on boat decks in every county in the Midlands. For many of the boatmen, they are the only outlet for their instinctive love of colour, because the large canal-carrying companies who handled the bulk of London to Birmingham traffic no longer budget for castles and flowers, but paint their boats in uniform colours of blue and maroon or red and green. The cans are expensive, but it would never occur to the boatman that a galvanised bucket would answer the purpose equally well, because he has a different and truer sense of values. So he buys his painted can by instalments, paying a shilling or two each time he passes, the agreement being one of mutual trust. The old shopkeeper shuffled out of the back regions in response to the clang of the doorbell. It was obvious that he had been a broad, powerfully built man before age had bent him, also from the way he peered at us that he was almost blind. At first he was inclined to be surly, but when we explained that we wished to purchase a water can and dipper, and had duly admired them, he unbent towards us, seating himself on a stool behind the counter. He used to paint the cans himself, he told us, but he confessed sadly that his sight was no longer able enough for him to do such fine work, and now they were painted for him at Braunston. He went on to deplore the modern conditions which compelled the boatman to work all hours 7 days a week to the detriment of his trade, recalling wistfully the more leisured days when they were steady fellows and tied up on a Sunday. Cans were not his only speciality, for he presently produced a cup and saucer for our inspection, It was a modern, cheap quality earthenware, but decorated with an interesting and possibly traditional Chinese design of a common type to early China. He explained proudly that this was his special pattern, made for him, and obtainable nowhere else. "You'll see plenty of them in London way," he declared, as if to say that no visitor to London could escape seeing a specimen, and we felt that Long Buckley had set London firmly in its place. All the while he was talking, he fiddled with a small brush, brushing his ears and his bushy moustache, a common mannerism which attracted us with an awful hypnotic fascination. When eventually we took leave of him, he showed us to the door, still talking volubly, and by this time brushing his shaggy eyebrows. Interesting and unique though the Buckley shop undoubtedly is, it doesn't compare in attraction or variety of stock with another canal shop that I knew at Stoke Bruin, 16 miles south. It was one of a row of thatched cottages along a towpath, and its cool, stone-flagged interior boasted so varied a stock as to call to mind the proud boast of Flecker's merchant grocer at the Gate of the Moon. "We have rosy candy, we have spikenard, mastic and terebinth and oil and spice, and such sweet jams meticulously jarred as God's own prophet eats in paradise." I gather that must be a poem of some description. The shop specialised in ropes and lines. Coils of every thickness of quality, from the coarsest manila to the finest white cotton, lay piled on the floor or hung from the low whitewashed rafters of the ceiling. Yet this was only the principal item of stock that catered for the boat family's every need. Here was a great basket full of crusty cottage loaves, there shelves of tea, jams and other groceries, which were crowded in piles of crockery, fat earthenware teapots and pendant festoons of hurricane lamps, kettles and saucepans. For the ailing there were herbal remedies, salves, liniments and pills aplenty, clay pipes, shag tobacco, braces and boots for the menfolk, aprons, buttons, hairpins and combs for their wives, while the children, there were licorice bootlaces, sherbet suckers, and great glass jars filled with enticing gaudy-coloured sweets, bull's-eyes, aniseed balls, and gobstoppers. In the heyday of the horse-boat, the shop was well placed, for the southern entrance of Blissworth Tunnel was visible from the threshold, and the tunnel tug had a well-chosen mooring before the door of the inn opposite. Here the north-bound boats would wait for the tug, and when it appeared, the south-bound boats in its train would in turn wait until a string of horses came over the hill. Now all is changed. Like the deserted hills and the canal, like the deserted inns, the canal shop is another victim of the time-saving mania, and 2 years ago Stoke Bruin's magic store closed its doors for ever. Before very long, the shop at Buckby will follow, because the boatman no longer has the time to stand and stare. That night at Norton, long after darkness had fallen, the motorboats passed by the mouth of the junction. We could hear the penetrating and unmistakable beat of their diesel engines, the rattle of paddle ratchets at the lock, and watch their lights creeping along the lip of the embankment. A Grand Union boat, southward bound with a cargo of coal, a pair of fellow Mortons going north, perhaps with 50 tons of sugar from the pool of London flyboats, most of them, making their journey 136 miles and 161 locks in 57 hours. No idle journey this, with 2 boats to handle, the motorboat and the towed butty boat, under every condition of wind and weather. We fell asleep with the sound of the boats in our ears. Oh, that's it. We fell asleep with the sound of that. So that was the last of the boats doing their stuff. We're on chapter 7, the Leicester Cut. Brilliant. How lovely is that? But repeated, 1944, first published, 1939 written then. Thanks for that. Let me just have a look at your comments. But what's fascinating, I just find this so fascinating that there we are, 80 years ago, he is lamenting a way of life because we're all turning into the rat race. And here we are 80 years ago with that rat race wound really up. And now here we are in lockdown, not in a rat race, tearing ourselves because we want to get out. And perhaps realising that this rat race is not a race worth running. The speed that, I mean, you know, I'm often myself berating the speed of progress and the change that it's like, why are we running so fast all the time? And this amazingly beautiful, serene world of travel and handmade, craft-made products that tugs at you, and yet we are all following like sheep the machine-made, quicker, instant stuff. And I think actually, I mean, if you look at what we're doing now, this live and other live things, you've got the videos which are, you know, relatively slick. But these live videos are interesting because you never quite know when they're going to end. They're not as slick. You can make mistakes. You can cock it up. You can get angry with yourself, as I do. And they're more human in a way than many of the videos that you make, because you can edit out every rough bit, and you know, it becomes a craft in its own self. But that the slowing down, I think, is so important, more so than we really realise. Let's just have a quick run through some of the comments before we go. Oh yeah, the U-boats on the canal. That was Lionel Thomas Caswell Rolt was his name. Tom Rolt. Yeah, Lionel, a great name. Lionel Jeffries. Why me? Why me? Always has to be me. That's from a film. Morton, I've escaped torpedoes so far on my trips to Gas Basin Street. Usually abbreviated to LTC Rolt or Tom Rolt. Oh, yeah. Married with 2 children. Did you know him, Linda? No, Linda is the skilled person of the Googling. I was at Tallinn Railway when Tom Rolt's widow was there to name a locomotive called Tom Rolt. First wife Angela, second wife Sonia. Richard read Mum to sleep, so she's off back to bed. Oh, great, there we are. My reading is very boring. He was very influential in forming the Inland Waterways Association. This book effectively inspired the beginning of the preservation of a lot of the canals in the UK. Yes, that's my understanding. Good description of a dank tunnel. What else have we got here? Long tunnel, 2,700 young. Just over whatever. I should be going on the gravel bike tomorrow. The gravel bike? What's the gravel bike? Today is the road bike. It's a gravel bike like what some people call a mountain bike. Only we don't have proper mountains as such. I use miles as I'm old-fashioned. Yes. Why? I don't understand when people, you know, all the road distances are in miles in this country. It's 20 miles to Horsham from where I am. It's 20 miles to Worthing from Horsham, funnily enough. And yet when people go for runs, they always talk about going for kilometres. Or what's worse is we're going for 15k. It's like, K? What's K? It's kilometres. Well, what's that in miles? What's 15k in miles? What? Give me a unit that I can understand. I don't understand what a K is. And to my mind, it's just because it makes them go, oh yes, I ran 6k today. It's like, well, what's that then? Well, it's about 4 miles. Oh, okay. So you only ran 4 miles. You didn't run 6 miles, which is what it sounded like, but you had this silly letter K. Don't get me started on K. I wonder if he would think the canals. I wonder what he would think of the canals if he was still around, says TurboStream. Well, that'd be interesting because I do follow Floating Our Boat, and they seem to be having an amazing and very peaceful life on board the canals. But you can't help feeling that they are that they're busy, but busy in a completely different way. People going on jaunts and holiday makers, which is what I'm going to be doing with the lovely Julia, hopefully in October. And then you feel a fraud. You just feel a fraud. You know, at least Rich and Fran, Floating Our Boat, are living on the boat, and it's their boat. They're living the dream. They're part of the canal, and rightfully so. Whereas when you go on holiday, it's kind of like you're not really. You're just you're a fraud, although you're helping to pay and keep the canals going and there, I suppose, for people like Richard and Fran, I guess. He's been listening to this and eating carrot soup. I like the sound of the canal shop. Yes, Audrey, I love that canal shop. You know, what happened to those? They're all dying out, aren't they? All of these lovely old-fashioned things are dying out, and it would just, you know, now it would be a Tesco's or something that have a few extra things. I fancy a gravel bike for doing some bike packing, Mark. Never heard the term gravel bike. Why do you keep putting yourself? I'm really enjoying your reading, says Steve G. Yes, I agree. It's pathetic. I use kilometres here because I'm in Europe and when in Rome and all that. Yes, but in the UK it's done. Yes, absolutely. I can understand it when you're abroad and that's their mile. You know, that's their thing. But we have such a mixed. We have such a mixed units over here, don't we? Miles, which I have been around since whenever. We still sometimes think in pounds and ounces, although we do supposed to be thinking in grams. Measurements in terms of, 6 foot for this and 5 foot for that, and we're supposed to be fixing that into that. These things don't seem to die, and I'm very pleased. Pounds, shillings and pence. I do remember pounds, shillings and pence, although when I was about 8 or 9, it changed into the current currency. And it's very strange when you read old books, or I say old books around the 70s. And what was I reading? I was reading something, and I'm so used to reading old books where they talk about pounds, shillings and pence. And then I was reading in this book and they were buying something and they said, oh yes, 20p for that seemed very expensive. And I thought, where was this published then? And I looked at it and it was published like something like 74 or something. And I thought, oh right, so they're writing in new currency. And I can't remember what it was for 20p, but it would be probably something that would be worth, I don't know, a tenner now, that you would expect to pay a tenner or 20 quid now. And they were saying, oh, 20p, it's a bit expensive. And you just think 20p is such a disposable unit now that reading it in a book is quite surprising. And yet when I read, say, somebody's earnings in the beginning of the 1900s or something in a factory, and they would be earning 12 shillings a week. I don't really know what that means. I can't quite get my head around what 12 shillings a week, what that would buy. And I know it's not very much, or someone would get 13 shillings a week. And it was like, whoa, you got an extra shilling. But you could sort of get, oh yeah, the labourer's wages was sort of 10 to 20 shillings a week, somewhere in that bracket. But I never really, historic unit of currency, which doesn't really resonate with me. But 20p, and it's like, when you hear people say, oh, we'll pay you 300 a year, and you think £300 a year, you sort of go, oh yes, but back then that meant quite a bit of money. I think my dad paid for a house. What was he saying? It was something, or he was on 600 a year, one of his jobs, and I was laughing, but of course it's so different. Foxes Afloat make good videos. I think I've seen one or two of them. I think Roth and Priestley are very good at being descriptive writers. Oh, Rolt and Priestley. Oh, yes, sorry. I thought that was a double act. Roth and Priestley. Rolt, and yes, are good at descriptive writers, knowing how to paint a picture with their words. It's just that Priestley had tendencies to be condescending and critically of other people and places, albeit in a humorous way. Yes, he was right. I mean, I'm reading a book about Priestley at the moment. Priestley's England, it's called, and it's a fascinating thing. And he is being pigeoned, and he quite accepted being pigeoned as middle brow, as they say. So not highbrow like the woman who committed, Virginia Woolf, who committed suicide in the River Ada. Or the River Ouse, whichever one it bloody was, down at Rodmell, or Robmell. They don't like it being said Rodmell. It's Robmell or something. Anyway, whatever. And that book, I think he deliberately set out to be like that. He's not always like that, so you can't judge him as a writer generally from that, because he I think from what I'm reading about him, I've read The Good Companions, which was his first big classic novel, and I've read Disappearing Empires or something, which is another of his books. And he is a good writer. I mean, he's a writer of his time. Another writer I did used to like, but he takes forever to get going, is Deltafield, whatever his name is, R.F. Deltafield, or whatever his name is. Nautical Miles. That's a standard around the world. There you go. That's what we need. 95% of the population use metric system, apparently, says Jim Hook. Well, that's what makes us English, makes us eccentric and different. That's to me, that's the core of it. It's because the metric system, 10 units make a large unit and so on. However, the American use miles, which is based on the British system, but now parts of Britain are using kilometres. I don't. I will never. I used to like Virginia Woolf, says Morton. I mean, I've never read any Virginia Woolf, so I can't comment on her writing, but I know she's supposed to be in that bracket of, or was in that bracket of highbrow. Now it may be that she's just ordinary brow. Like the reading, Richard must go. Yeah, and I must go because I've got to make a video for tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining me. We will continue tomorrow with chapter, whatever I said it was, 11, the Leicester Cut. So thank you for joining me again on another reading. It's been absolutely fun. Felt I read a bit better today. Sorry I keep putting myself down, but I always want to do better. Just want to know, I get really annoyed when I mess up. Martin Zero also has some very interesting adventures in Canal. He has done some things with Foxes Afloat. Yeah, I have seen a Martin Zero. For me, he's just too in your face for me personally. But I haven't seen very many, so I need to see some more. I mean, I don't want to, tarnish anybody who does the YouTube stuff, because we're all doing it in our own different ways, and I feel I'm still trying to find myself within the YouTube genre, if you like, because when I started doing the long format, it was very much television style filming, and I still enjoy that. I still enjoy setting up the camera and doing pull focuses and beautiful tracking shots or sliding shots and cutaways that tell part of the story differently than the immediacy of YouTube. And of course, most of my videos now, I have that immediacy of YouTube, a little GoPro camera, and it's all a little bit sort of real, but I still hark to the craft of spending time and putting something which just looks lovely. So I'm all over the place. So, but some people appeal to you and some people appeal less. everybody keeps advising me to watch. The trouble is when people advising me to watch certain people, certain Canal people, or certain walking people, and the more people push me to keep looking at these things, I am one of those stubborn things. I just don't go with the sheep. If everybody's, when Harry Potter came out, everybody went, oh, you've got to go and see Harry Potter. And it was like, okay, I'm not going then. I'm not going because everybody's going in. I'm going to go and look at the lesser known things like London Belongs to Me and films that people aren't talking about because I don't believe in hype. I don't believe in hype. Perry says, I was born in 1984 and I use Imperial mostly from small weights. Good for you. Imagine being born in 1874. Gosh, that is a long time ago. You might like Patrick Dickerson video on how to fly a drone. He's just posted it. Yes, I am going to go and try and catch up with Gabriel because he seems to be the drone master and go and fly the drone near him. That sounds great. Anyway, must go. Can just, trouble with me is I can sit and waffle a load of old nonsense for ages. Thank you very much for coming along and I will catch up with you tomorrow and later tonight and whenever. Take care. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.